Education Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
You're welcome to another segment where we will be treating Native Son by Richard Wright. Now, this is one of the texts that we'll be reading under the non-African prose or non-African novel category. For your WAEC and GCE syllabus, you are required to pick one novel from the non-African prose category. Now, non-African prose, we are referring to novels that are written outside the shores of Africa by authors or writers that are not Africans. So, we'll be looking at Native Son by Richard Wright. Now, in this story, the author, Richard Wright, is trying to relive the experiences of young boys, young black boys in the 1930s Chicago. As at that time, black people lived in an environment where they were oppressed by the whites. They were dominated by the whites because whites believed black people to be inferior. They believed that nothing good could come out of black people. So it was a time of serious racial discrimination. Now I want you to remember the experiences of the likes of Martin Luther King, who had to fight against this racial discrimination. There were figures like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the likes of these people fought against the oppression. And there were also some other activists who fought against the oppression. We remember the story of Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat in a bus. She was a black woman who refused to give up her seat for a white man because according to what happened, she was asked to stand up for a white man to sit, but she stood on her right and she was sent to prison. Now, these people that I have just mentioned, they represent the real actual figures who stood against oppression from white people. So now let us look at the story proper, having looked at the background at which this story was written. We look at the first scene. Bigger Thomas. He is a young man, a very, very young man, who lives in a cramped apartment with his siblings, Vera Thomas, Buddy Thomas, and his dear religious mother. Now, it opens in a scene where the apartment is so cramped that there are so many things around the house. It's barely enough for them. There is no space. So when they wake up in the morning, the nature of the place is that they are living in a one-room apartment. So the mother and Vera, who are the only females among them, they have to tell the boys to close their eyes and turn around while they change. They didn't have separate rooms. So as the story progresses, we find out that there is a huge rat that runs around the house, and the boys decide to kill it. Now, it's a funny instance because the incident of killing that rat signifies, or rather foreshadows, the events that are to happen later in the story. Killing of that rat symbolizes Bigger Thomas's first murder, in quotes. Now, when you kill something, when you decide to kill something, it means that thing is a threat to your existence. And that is what happens at the first scene of the story. So during their breakfast, Bigger's mother is pressurizing him to go and take up a job and be a responsible black man. Now, usually, because of the situation of the blacks, they are only permitted to do menial jobs. So, Bigger has no option but to accept his mother's advice. Actually, he did not want to take the advice because he feels too proud to work for a white man. Now, the name of the white man is Mr. Dalton. Mr. Dalton is a very rich, aristocratic white man who is believed to be a philanthropist. Now, this is how Mr. Dalton works. He leases out homes, apartments to black people expensively, cramped apartments. And at the same time, he would use the money to give it back to black schools. So people believe him to be a philanthropist, but he is not. He is rather a figure of oppression. a figure of oppression, a figure of white oppression. So now, somehow, Bigger Thomas's brother, his name is Buddy Thomas, envies his elder brother for that position. I mean, he sees it as a privilege to be a driver to a white man, but Bigger does not see it that way. Now, what happens in the course of the story? On one of his trips, Bigger Thomas drives Mr. Dalton's daughter, Mary, her name is Mary, and her boyfriend, Jan, to a bar where they drink and they get drunk. Now, it should be noted that Mary and her boyfriend, Jan, are very significant characters here. Mary and her boyfriend, Jan, they are communists. They believe in a classless society where everyone is equal. So they treat Bigger Thomas as an equal, where when Jan sees Bigger, he shakes his hand, you know, they interact properly. And the Bigger begins to feel uncomfortable. He feels that they are mocking him. He feels that the friendship of the white man is deceitful. He feels that they are about to do something to him. But somehow, as the story turns out, Jan goes home first, then Bigger has to drop Mary off. Now, when he gets home, both of them are so drunk, so Mary cannot climb the stairs to her room. He has to help her up to her room. Now, that is beyond his borders. He's not supposed to go into her room, but because of her vulnerable drunken state, he has to take her to the room. And somewhere along the line, they begin to make out when they get to the room. Now, something funny happens. Mary's mother hears footsteps and begins to grope her way into Mary's room. Now, something ironical happens here. Bigger Thomas does not know that Mary's mother is blind. So he thinks that Mary's mother, that is Mrs. Dalton, is seeing him. So Mary is so drunk, she's lying on the bed, and Bigger does not want his presence to be registered in the room. He does not want the mother to know that he's there. So he places a pillow on Mary's nose to quieten her. But unknown to him, he is suffocating her to death. By the time Mary's mother comes, actually touches her daughter, makes sure that her daughter is in bed. She actually smells the breath from her daughter. Remember, Mary's mother is blind. Bigger Thomas is at one end of the room, watching, observing, while pressing a pillow to Mary's face. So at the end of the day, Mary's mother leaves, and by the time Bigger feels Mary's body, he discovers that he has already suffocated her to death. Now, that is the beginning of the climax that we are yet to see, that is yet to unfold in the story. Now, what happens? Bigger seems to have criminal tendencies, because the course of the story shows how he begins to involve himself in some actions to cover his tracks. Now, he tries to put Mary's body into her trunk, into her box, but it wouldn't fit him. So what does he do with her body? He takes it to the furnace and pushes Mary's body to the furnace. Now, as he pushes the body, he discovers that her head cannot fit into the furnace. So he cuts off the head. In fact, he's doing everything he can to cover his tracks. All right. So he decides to cut off her head so that it can properly fit into the furnace. Now, as I am narrating this, it sounds funny, but actually, you begin to wonder whether is Bigger a psycho, is he a maniac, or a victim of circumstance. Now, as the story unfolds, you will begin to understand. Sometimes you want to pity this boy, you want to pity him for his actions, and sometimes you want to feel angry at him for behaving in that way. Now, it should be noted that apart from this, as this is going on, Bigger has some friends, namely GH, GUS, Gus, and Jack. They are his friends. And usually what they do, they go to black shop owners and they rob them. Now, there was a time that Bigger suggested to his friends that let them rob a white man for a change. But somehow, Bigger becomes overcome by fear. Now, it should be noted that the first part of the book is titled Fear. It's titled Fear. So, at the end of the day, he truncates their plan. He gets into a fight with one of his friends, and at the end of the day, they are distracted from that plan. So, back to what happens between Bigger Thomas and Mary. He tries to cover his track. He cleans the blood. He tries to obliterate every sign that there is a murder that has that has occurred in the house. Meanwhile, it's a very big house. It's a big household. Nobody is aware of what happened until weeks later when they discover Mary's bones in the fireplace, and they begin to investigate. At this time, Bigger Thomas decides to run away. He connives with his girlfriend Bessie, and they decide to run away. And he tries to trick them into. He tries to trick the Dalton family into bringing ransom money. And at the end of the day, Bessie begins to ask a lot of questions because she is afraid. Now, Bessie represents a figure of a black lady who is afraid, living in a white community. And so at the end of the day, Bigger decides to take her out. While they are hiding in one of the uncompleted abandoned buildings, there is a love affair whereby Bigger makes love to her. Sorry, it's not even make love. Bigger has to rape her, and afterwards he uses a brick and bludgeons her to death. Now, you begin to wonder what is the difference between Bigger killing Bessie, a black person like himself, and he killing Mary Dalton, who is a white woman. As the story progresses, we begin to understand the reason for Bigger's actions. Now, Bigger is on the run. He is on the run. He is on the run, running away from the police because they have finally discovered that he is the one responsible for Mary's death. At the end of the day, he is caught after so many battles. After trying to escape, he is finally caught and apprehended, rounded up by the police. So going on further in the story, Bigger Thomas is finally caught by the police. Now, something funny happens. Jan, who was Mary's boyfriend, decided to look beyond Bigger's crimes and enlist a lawyer, Max Boris, to defend Bigger in court. Now, you'll find out that in the midst of Bigger Thomas being in a community whereby he is being oppressed by white people, there are still some white people who are nice to him. For example, Jan, Mary, whom he killed, and Max Boris, who is the white man, the white lawyer, to defend him in court. Both men treat Bigger as an individual and see him as an equal. Now, Max tries to save Bigger from the death penalty, arguing that his client is guilty. Yet, Bigger is a product of his fearful, terrifying and frustrating environment. Max tries to explain that assuming Bigger and his people are given better opportunities, if they are treated as equals like the white man, they will not find themselves in such a crime. So Max warns that there are more men like Bigger in the community in America, and if America does not put an end to this vicious cycle of hatred and vengeance, things would escalate. However, despite Max's arguments, Bigger is still sentenced to death. Now, at this point, we would look at the themes that are being itemized in this story. The first thing we'll be looking at is, first and foremost, racial discrimination / prejudice. Everything surrounding the main character, Bigger Thomas, is racial discrimination. Remember, Bigger Thomas and his other black people cannot aspire to be anything except to do menial jobs. Remember, they are only allowed to be drivers, house helps. If you have read the story, The Help, you would also have an idea of the living of black people at that time who were working for whites. The author wrote this novel during a time when black people were relegated in such a way that blacks could not aspire to be anything. In the first part of the novel, when Bigger Thomas is discussing with his friend, he actually tells his friend that he dreams of being a pilot, but he's frustrated, he's angry because the white people will not allow them to be anything. Thus, the whites dictate how black people should live and what they cannot do with their lives. Another thing we'll be looking at is fear of oppression. Fear is the most dominant emotion that Biggar feels. Everything that Biggar does in the novel is out of fear. He is afraid of being caught with a white woman. That is why he kills Mary Dalton. He did not know. When he realizes that he had mistakenly killed Mary Dalton, he now decides to cover his track. Fear of the police, fear of what people would think of him, fear of the shame of being associated with such crime. He begins to compound his problems. Ironically, the more he tries, the more he compounds his problem. So, at the end of the day, fear leads him to terrible and unintended consequences. Left for him, it was not something that he intended, but as the events unfold, as he involves himself in these actions, he finds himself entangled in a web of crime. Now, next one, the effect of racism on the oppressed. Richard Wright's exploration of Biggar's psychological corruption gives us a new perspective on the oppressive effect that racism had on black population in 1930s America. Blacks are beset with the hardship of economic oppressors and forced to act subserviently. Remember, characters like Biggar's mother, Vera Thomas, Buddy Thomas, who are his family members, they have already decided to embrace the way their lives have been made to be. Another character who acts subserviently like the other blacks is the priest who comes to visit Biggar Thomas in the prison. You know, he keeps telling Biggar Thomas to confess his sins and so that Biggar Thomas can amend his ways before God. Now, we find out that religion does not really play a perfect role in this story, because nobody seems to understand what Biggar Thomas is going through. Nobody seems to understand his psychological warfare. Nobody seems to understand the grave consequences that he is about to face. Maybe except Jan Erlon and Max Boris, who are bent on defending him in court. Now, at this juncture, we will look at the characters and characterization. Now, let me comment a little on the characterization. Like I said, characterization is the way a writer may want to portray the character. Now, when you read through the events of the novel, I asked a question. I said, is Biggar Thomas a maniac, a psycho, or maybe just a victim of circumstance? You can actually feel his range of so many emotions. He's feeling a myriad of so many emotions. At one point, he feels fear. At some point, he feels afraid. At some point, he feels confident that he is impregnable, like nobody can ever catch him. At some point, he is depressed. He is frustrated. And that is what has informed all his actions in the story. So now enough emphasis has been laid on the character. He's a poor, uneducated black man who hails from the lowest rank of the American social and economic ladder. And his lack of education left him no option than to do menial jobs. That is how he feels. That is how he became trapped and entangled with the Mary Dalton and the Dalton family escapade, where he now finds himself living a life of crime. We will look at another character, Mary Dalton. She is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Dalton. She identifies herself as progressive. Remember, she is a communist who believes in a classless society. She treats Biggar as an equal, but unfortunately, she experiences death. She dies because Biggar is uncomfortable with her gestures, and her gestures seem to be misinterpreted by Biggar Thomas. Now, we also look at Mr. and Mrs. Dalton, who are the parents of Mary Dalton. They are a wealthy white millionaire couple living in Chicago. Mrs. Dalton is blind. Mr. Dalton has earned a fortune in real estate. Although he profits from charging high rents to the poor black tenants, He nonetheless claims to be a generous philanthropist and supporter of Black Americans. Now, this is an irony. This is ironical. Now, we have other characters. There is Buddy Thomas, who is Bigger's younger brother. Buddy Thomas actually sees his elder brother as somebody to emulate. He envies his brother for being a chauffeur. Ironically, Bigger Thomas does not like the job. He does not enjoy working for white people because he is a typical black man who is proud and does not want to have anything to do with the whites. Another character here is Jan Erlon. Jan Erlon is Mary's boyfriend. He belongs to the Communist Party. Like Mary, he also treats Bigger Thomas as an equal like himself. He also believes in a classless society where black and whites are equal. Eventually, it is not surprising that Jan turns out to be the person who recommends a lawyer to defend Bigger Thomas in court. Boris Marx, he is a Jewish lawyer who works for the Labor Defenders, an association affiliated with the Communist Party. Like Jan, he sees Bigger as an equal. He extends an arm of friendship to Bigger Thomas and defends him in court. Unfortunately, Bigger is still sentenced to death. Mrs. Thomas is Bigger Thomas's devoutly religious mother. She has accepted her precarious, impoverished position in life and warns Bigger at the beginning of the novel that if he does not change his ways, he will meet a bad end. However, probably this turns out to be a kind of foreshadowing. Now we also have Britain, who is a racist, anti-communist private investigator who helps Mr. Dalton investigate Mary's disappearance. Now they are also the friends of Bigger Thomas. They are namely GH, Gus and Jack. They are Bigger's friends who often plan to execute robberies together with him, and somehow they are also subservient in nature. They take things as they come. Now we try to let me shed before I round up this class. Let us shed a little light on Bigger Thomas's character. You begin to wonder why he is always angry, because his character is seen to be a very angry person who hates anything that has to do with the whites. Now you begin to wonder, what would Bigger have become if he was given a positive opportunity? I see Bigger Thomas as somebody who would have become a lawyer, a revolutionary, somebody who would rise up to fight. Unfortunately, he channeled his emotions in the wrong directions. You cannot achieve anything by killing people. You cannot achieve anything by committing murder. And so, well, at the end of the day, we actually see that probably this was his only way of revolting against the white community. So now let us ask a question. I will repeat that question. So do you think Bigger Thomas is a maniac, a psycho, or probably just a victim of circumstance? And at this juncture, we'll also briefly comment on the language and style of the writer. Well, you find out that they make use of Black American English. You know the way Black Americans talk. They make use of Black American English. For example, what you gonna do? Say bigger. You know, and they also they make use. They don't make use of the proper tenses, how it is usually supposed to be. So take note that some questions would be displayed, or they will pop up on your screen to determine how much you have learned in this class. Another question you should take note of is trying to answer this. Explain the theme of racial discrimination in this book, Native Son by Richard Wright. I believe you have found this material very useful. Thank you very much.